ethics. One of the elements of the code of ethics for professional engineers in TNT is that if they know of something going on which is against the code of ethics, even if they're not involved, it's their duty to inform the Board of Engineering.
I mean, you were showing us that photograph, and I know that quarrying is also a huge problem in Trinidad and Tobago, and we want to know what the current law is, but part of the problem seems to be that everything is very opaque, nothing is transparent. So perhaps you can tell us where we are regarding quarrying.
Well, as regards to quarrying in particular, again, that road leading up to a quarry, it was being done without a certificate of environmental clearance. There wasn't a certificate, and as the gentleman described at the beginning of the program, devastating, making the road twice as wide on a slope which is already almost a cliff face and throwing all the debris down into the river, practically blocking it. It was really dramatic. Would you believe that there wasn't even a certificate of environmental clearance issued?
And that presumably is in itself controversial, because some are saying that quarries less than 50 acres do not need clearance. Now, how did that happen?
Yeah, 150 acres actually. Well, I think it was December 2008, the line minister put through a statement or a motion in Parliament which was subject to negative resolution. In other words, it passes unless somebody says no. And the change was to allow quarries to go ahead without any clearance as long as they're less than 150 acres. And basically nobody noticed. It passed through, the 30 days passed, and it became law. That is a real subterfuge.
And so what are the implications for having such a lot of quarrying in this country for us, for our environment?
Well, I dare say if the quarrying is done properly, it will supply the needs of sustainable development. But clearly you can't be destroying rivers and roads and hillsides and heavy trucks breaking up the access to rural villages, but presumably if it's done properly, no problem.
Okay, Peter, I was actually going to ask you a question now, Jeff. In terms of your laws, what drives your laws? Is it the people? Do you have strong lobbies? Or is it the enforcement arm of the law?
Laws in the U.S. Are almost universally, whether it's the United States Congress or at the state level, generated within the legislative body itself. And so the United States Congress will be the body that generates the law rather than being generated or written first by the executive branch. However, the executive branch can often influence that or suggest ideas and to move forward. But clearly, members of Congress, members of state legislatures are heavily influenced, as they should be, by their constituents. And when constituents want something to happen, their elected leaders are, obliged to move forward with those ideas. And so laws come from a variety of sources. Usually it's the legislative body itself who decides that something needs to be done. There's a gap that needs to be filled, or there's a new oversight that needs to be in place, or less so in some instances.
I guess what I'm trying to do is bridge the gap. We have laws, they're not enforced. You have laws, they are enforced. Why are your laws enforced and ours are not?
Well, I can only speak to our laws, I think. And I think the enforcement that takes place in the United States is just through a fairly vigorous legal structure and legal system where the executive branch respects those laws that are passed by the legislative branch, and by our Constitution is bound to enforce them. Regardless of which party or which government passed the law or signed the bill into law, the existing current administration is obliged to enforce those laws, and our court system is there and is very robust, so that individuals, private individuals or public interest groups can file suit to challenge something like some of the descriptions that have been described here today, and those enforcements are done.
Okay. Well, we need to take a short break. We'll be right back with more on this environmental series on CNC3. Welcome back to the final segment of Cleaning Up the Mess. This is CNC3. Today we're talking about what Trinidad and Tobago can learn from the US and also assessing where we stand on legislation and enforcement. Jeff, I want to come back to you. How does the US deal with the external costs of pollution? We've seen that BP, for instance, is being told by your president that they're responsible not only for cleanup costs, but also for lost revenue in the Gulf states.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the way to go? Put the responsibility clean on the people who are culpable?
Generally speaking, yes. When it's possible, and it's not always possible, and so the federal government and other governments within the states will set up funds that are necessary to cover those gaps where there may not be a clear culpable party. Earlier you mentioned super funds, where the problems have become so large that in fact the government has to step in and provide the funding to clean them up. But I think certainly in this day and age, the people of the United States and the government and the Congress are looking towards those found to be liable. And if it's a corporation in this instance, then the corporation is obligated to step forward and take care of its liabilities.
Is it economically viable to be environmentally conscious in the US? Or is it heavily subsidized?
I don't think it's heavily subsidized. I think some would argue that it's difficult to be economically viable, but I think there are certainly a lot of models out there that show that it is economically viable, that in fact if everyone is operating to the same standards and we all have similar goals in mind to reach a good level of environmental stewardship, then in fact there are marketplace incentives that can be put into place that would allow companies, private enterprise, to step forward and help us achieve those goals, and to give consumers the power to make their choices. What products do they wish to buy? And in many instances, through incentives that the government puts into place, like labeling. If you know that a bottle is recycled and you choose to buy this bottle over a bottle that's not recycled or recyclable, then you're putting the power right there with the consumer, and that brings back our concept of civic engagement. It brings some responsibility and some power back to the individual.
Yes. Peter, do you think that multinationals operating in countries like Trinidad and Tobago should meet the higher environmental standards set by their countries when in countries where they operate, where there is no legislation?
There's not necessarily any higher level in countries other than Trinidad and Tobago. Some are better, some are worse. A problem that we have is that actually the foreign consultants tend to be given more credibility by the powers that be than the local scientists. That is a real problem. And this has, I could give examples of that. The aluminium company bringing Norwegians to try and persuade the people of TNT that the smelter to be built in TNT would be safe. And it's a Chinese plant, but they're bringing Norwegians to tell Trinidadians that the Chinese plant in Trinidad would be safe. Typical example.
You seem to think that we don't have confidence in ourselves, and perhaps that's what we need to develop to look after our own interests.
Exactly. There even seems to be a sort of discrimination against local scientists, that they're automatically ruled out from any consideration.
Well, Jeff, we don't have much time, but I'd like to ask you, would the US be willing to help Trinidad and Tobago in terms of raising our environmental awareness and perhaps helping in other concrete ways which involve dollars and cents?
Well, of course, and obviously it's not a matter of becoming involved. We already are. The United States and Trinidad and Tobago are excellent partners in the region. We have an outstanding bilateral relationship, and we do a lot together. And under the Obama administration, since in 2009, when President Obama was here in Port of Spain, he actually launched what's called the Environmental Climate Partnership of the Americas. Trinidad and Tobago has been part of this effort. It's an initiative throughout the Western Hemisphere to actually share ideas, take the best practices from different regions, different parts of the hemisphere, and work towards common goals. And that common goal is generally moving towards a clean energy economy. And I think the United States is definitely partnering with Trinidad and Tobago on that front. We're currently negotiating a memorandum of understanding regarding renewable energy projects and potential technology development here. And so, yeah, that we've done it, and we will continue to work with